Hi guys, how are you today? It's Monday, which means it's time for another Mad History Monday. Every other Monday, I sit down and talk about an interesting story that happened in history. None of the topics go in order, they're usually just random things that I find. If that sounds like fun to you, then I highly suggest that you subscribe because I do post one of these videos every other Monday, usually. This week, we are talking about the Jamestown settlement and its dark history. Today's video might be a little bit too gruesome for some people, so keep that in mind going forward. Jamestown was established in 1607 when a group of a little more than 100 English men and boys traveled across the sea to North America to start a settlement. It was named after their king, James I, and would become the first permanent English settlement in North America. Based in Virginia, the settlement was surrounded by water on 3 sides. This, they figured, would be the best spot to keep them safe from attack and for them to be able to defend off any enemies. The settlers didn't have the easiest time settling into this new world. During this time of exploration and colonization, North America was actually still in the Little Ice Age. So the summers were hotter than expected and the winters were colder. The seasons were basically exaggerated. Before their arrival, the English assumed this new land would have a similar climate to lands that were situated along the same lines of latitude. This was not the case. And to make matters worse, when the colonizers arrived to Jamestown, they were arriving at the beginning of a 7-year drought that would last from 1606 to 1612, the driest period in 770 years. It was a terrible time to make America great again. Or just make America in general. Throughout the first years, supply ships had been sent over with new colonists, including women and children, and supplies that would help them last through the winter. In July 1609, a fleet of 9 ships were sent to Jamestown to do the same. But the fleet was separated and damaged due to a hurricane. The biggest ship, the Sea Venture, was shipwrecked on Bermuda, with most of the colony's supplies and leaders. Some of the ships did eventually make it to Jamestown in August, but they carried with them very few supplies and many colonists. In October, Captain John Smith, who was a leader of the colony, was injured and had to return to England. George Percy then became president of the colony. During the winter of 1609 to 1610, things only got worse. This was the starving time. Disease and death were very common within the settlement. They drank from unclean, slimy water supplies that resulted in many sicknesses. The water they were drinking contained high amounts of salt and were more than likely contaminated by human and animal waste, and it also may have been poisoned. Many died from starvation, malnutrition, fevers, the Powhatans, infection. They were relying on the Powhatans for food for a while, but their relationship really began to sour, especially due to the effects of the drought. The English couldn't grow their crops very successfully and became very greedy for food. And the Powhatans more than likely had shortages themselves. And since they were living on Powhatan hunting grounds, there was a constant fear of attack, especially if you left the fort. Percy later wrote that Indians killed as fast without the fort as famine and pestilence did within. During the starving time, the settlers became so hungry for food and too scared to leave the settlement to find food that they just started eating anything that they could get their hands on. Whatever animals were available to them, like dogs, cats, horses, mice, rats. They even ate poisonous snakes, and they ate leather from their belts and boots. But in 2012, it was discovered that they ate something even more gruesome: their fellow settlers. Before this, we had scriptural evidence of cannibalism in Jamestown, but nothing physical to actually prove that it happened. Years after the starving time, George Percy had written a letter that gave away the deepest, darkest secrets of the colonists during that winter. He wrote, "Having fed upon our horses and other beasts as long as they lasted, we were glad to make shift with vermin as dogs, cats, rats, and mice, as to eat boots, shoes, and any other leather. And now famine beginning to look ghastly and pale in every face, that nothing was spared to maintain life and to do those things which seem incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of graves and to eat them. And some have licked up the blood which hath fallen from their weak fellows." 80 to 90% of the Jamestown population died by early 1610. So we had an idea that there might have been cannibalism in Jamestown, but no definitive proof of this until 2012 when archaeologists found a deposit of refuse that had butchered horse and dog bones in it. This apparently is only done in times of extreme hunger or starvation. As they were going through these bones and excavating the area, they found a set of human teeth and a partial human skull. They also found a partial leg bone. It was discovered that the skull belonged to a 14-year-old girl. Since these human bones were found with other food remains, it was almost immediately thought that this was evidence of cannibalism. The Smithsonian forensic anthropologist Douglas Owsley analyzed the bones after they were found, and he gives us some insight on how he thinks it all went down. He says that the chops to the forehead are very tentative and incomplete. Then the body was turned over and there were 4 strikes to the back of the head, probably done with a lever or a lightweight hatchet, one of which was the strongest and split the skull in half. A penetrating wound was then made to the left temple, probably by a single-sided knife, which was used to pry open the head and remove the brain. It's clear that her body was dismembered for consumption. They probably ate her brain first because it decomposes so fast. Owsley also thinks that Jane is what they call her, was a child who likely arrived in Jamestown in 1609 on one of the resupply ships. She was more than likely a maidservant or the child of a gentleman. But because of the isotope analysis of her bones, the reality is that she probably was the child of a gentleman or part of the upper class in England. A high level of nitrogen was found in her bones, indicating she probably had a high-protein diet. She ate a lot of meat, and meat was expensive and a hot commodity of the time. It's also thought that she was newer to the colony because she didn't have evidence of a high corn-based diet, which was prevalent at the time in Jamestown. It's crazy how much they can find out from the chemical analysis of bone. They don't really think that the cannibals killed her. I mean, it's definitely possible, but they think that she more than likely died first and then they ate her after she was dead. They were desperate for food. And it's thought that more than one person ate her. Some of the knife marks and scrapes on her bones were more skilled than others. So one of the cannibals had some sort of skill or knowledge on how to butcher meat properly. Lovely. Poor girl though, right? Like, yikes. You have to live with a bunch of men and then they just eat your brain. George Percy, the guy I had mentioned before, also wrote that he tortured and burned a man alive who had confessed to killing, salting, and eating his pregnant wife. So Jamestown was obviously not the place to be if you were a woman. This Percy guy just gave away all the secrets, didn't he? So because archaeologists have found evidence of cannibalism in Jamestown that correlates with the starving time, it's more likely now that George Percy's letters about cannibalism are true. Before we weren't so sure, we were like, maybe. But now it's like, oh yeah, they really did eat people. So who knows, we might find more remains of these cannibalism victims in the future. I hope you enjoyed learning about this with me today. Is enjoyed the right word? It's an interesting topic because Jamestown was almost abandoned after the starving time. And if that had happened, there may not even have been the United States of America. So basically, these people ate their friends so I could be here today. I'll put a link in the description box below so that you can go see the pictures of Jane's skull if you're interested in that. You can see all of the markings. It's pretty wild. Also, they did one of those forensic scientific-y things and recreated a model of what they think she might have looked like. So you can go see that too. But anyway, thanks for hanging out with me today. This topic is pretty gruesome and disturbing, but it can teach us things. You may think your life is hard right now, but at least it's not so hard that you have to eat your neighbor's child. So, yeah, yes. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!